Welcome to the Living All In podcast. I appreciate you joining for what I hope you find are some thought-provoking discussions of life, leadership, character, perseverance, and living intentionally in every aspect of life. I'm a business owner, executive coach, and a strategist for business and government leaders across the U.S. More than any of that, though, I'm a husband, a friend, an adventurer, and a believer in what others at times say is impossible. A guy who is out to live life to its fullest and who simply doesn't believe in half measures. I hope you find something in each episode that you can apply to your life, that it inspires you to live life with purpose, with intention, and appreciation for the gift of every day, moment, and opportunity. That from the little to the big, the daily grind to the life-changing opportunities, you wake up every day committed to living all in. I shouldn't be here, alive, much less where I am in life. People are who they are, I believe, because of or in spite of their circumstances and environment. As I share my story, I think you'll find I'm a little of both. I'd like to think I've overcome the worst and ugliest of what I knew growing up, what I saw as a young adult and in my early professional career. I'm also self-aware enough in this chapter of my life to be honest with myself, and now with all of you, about the demons I still battle, the scars inside, and the ways it all shapes how I approach life and people. 35 years ago, I was a kid most were betting against, commenting on the tragedy of, or warning their daughters not to get too close to. I wasn't a kid getting into serious trouble, but it would be fair to say it was a troubled life. At 15, I was living on my own in a studio apartment in, let's just say, not the nicest part of town, wondering if I could afford to go fancy and eat mac and cheese, or if we were sticking with ramen again this week. Today, I have $1 million home along the Rocky Mountains, a second home in Florida, and spend time every year back in Hawaii. I've served my country. I've created and led multiple businesses in a variety of sectors, and now advise business, community, and government leaders across the U.S. on some of the most complex challenges they face. But more than any of those material things, I have a wife and life partner I never dreamed I could find or deserve, and her two amazing kids who make me want to work every day to be a better person. I have clients across the country who truly inspire me as they work to make their communities, state, our country, and world a better place. And I have a group of friends whose friendship humbles me and makes my life richer every day. The path from there to here was not a straight line or an easy path. It's not something I'd wish on anybody, but it's also not something I'd trade for anything. Along the way, I've danced with death more than once. The first time from things I signed up to do, the latest time from an incurable disease I live with and thrive every day in spite of, and despite what some told me to expect for my quality of life. In my life, I've seen unspeakable things that would give most people nightmares, and in doing my job, I've done things most would never understand. I've danced on both sides of moral lines on the playing field of business, geopolitics, and fighting for survival. I've also seen true beauty, things that border on miracles, and I've reveled in successes beyond imagination, and in the beauty of the perfect wave, and in sunrises no painting or photo could ever capture. Having known both the ugliest and the most beautiful, I've come to know exactly what I will and won't accept, what I do and don't want, what is and isn't worth having in my life. No question, there will always be some bad with the good. But there are lines we all have to draw of what we expect or will tolerate from ourselves and in others. I've had to find peace with the worst of it, and with both what was done by others and what I did myself. Every single day is another step on the path of growth and to live a life worthy of the gift. As you might guess, I've learned a few lessons along the way, come to a few conclusions about people and the world, and in my own never-finished journey to be at peace and be a better person, have built the framework of my own code for living. In my work as an executive coach and as a negotiator and strategist, I find myself leaning a lot on the pillars of that code. As I've shared pieces of it with a few friends or clients, I've been asked about sharing those ideas more publicly. I don't think the pillars or guiding principles mean much without being able to dig into the why or the what behind them or how they play out in real life. So instead of just printing or posting a bunch of one-liners, I find myself here with you, ready to launch this podcast. I'm grateful for every listener and viewer giving this show a shot, a chance to convince you that spending some of your time listening is worth it. So welcome to the pilot episode of the Living All In podcast. In the shows to come, we'll cover a lot of ground and talk with who I think are some pretty amazing people. I'll share a lot about my beliefs, the guiding principles that shape me and my approach. We'll explore styles of leadership, trends in society, and the moral codes we each choose to live by and that make up the social contracts of decent communities and civilized societies. Most episodes are going to dig into what I've come to believe are some of the most important characteristics, habits, and traits for happiness and success, both personally and professionally. Behind a lot of those are some lessons I've learned, usually the hard way. We'll cover topics from different leadership styles at home, in your community, and at work, to the importance of taking ownership for your life and decisions, of putting in the work instead of looking for shortcuts, and of simple things like taking pride in your work and keeping your word. We'll also get into more on the personal journey and growth side of life, like knowing your why, living with purpose, making time for the people and things that matter, and truly embracing the gift we all get every morning. We get to wake up to another day. Although I'm about to put everything out on the table, I've generally lived a pretty private life. At times out of professional necessity, and at other times simply out of personal preference. Some friends or professional colleagues may recognize some of the themes or even anecdotes I share in some episodes. But a lot of what I'll be talking about are things I haven't shared outside the confines of my closest friends, if at all. Some needed enough time to pass before I could or would speak to them publicly. Some I've never shared, some that have been bottled up, and some that may make a few people cringe or worry what I may say. While I've got plenty of thoughts to share, I'm equally excited to keep learning. From the process of sharing things so publicly, from engaging with all of you listening or watching, and from the guests who will be joining. Life has been a pretty wild ride for me so far, which has meant I've had the opportunity to meet some incredible people whose stories, perspectives, and expertise I'm looking forward to sharing through interviews on the podcast. Guests will range from Hollywood hitmakers, Silicon Valley legends, and world-caliber athletes to top-selling authors, entrepreneurs, some of the best-known and completely unknown warriors and silent heroes who have undertaken tasks or lives most can't even comprehend to preserve a way of life many take for granted. We'll also talk with everyday heroes, like teachers, community leaders, and others across the country and the world who are out there making a difference. I truly hope that in every episode, every listener or viewer finds something they can draw on and use to take action in your own life. From little morsels or thoughts that make you think a little differently about how you interact with people or take on your daily tasks, to big ideas for how to turn around relationships, careers, or plot new chapters in life. This, for me, truly is about trying to give back to a world that has given me so much. If with each episode I can help one person jumpstart their own path or overcome an obstacle you're up against by sharing the things I've learned the hard way or by sharing my take on things, that will be the win for me. For me to ask you to give your time, to ask you to give weight to what I say as more than the latest wannabe social media influencer, I think you deserve to know who your host is, what my story is, and what gives me any kind of standing to talk about much of anything. On that last piece, let's be clear. I have ideas. I have suggestions. I may even have my answers, but I'm far from perfect. don't have all the answers, and am undeniably a flawed human being. I can't promise to have the perfect answers to everything, but I can promise, and do promise, that what I share will always be the absolute best I have to give and will be pretty unfiltered. So speaking of unfiltered, if you're easily offended, listen with caution. I'm not planning to get ugly, but it will get very real. Some of the topics are going to get very uncomfortable for me, for guests, and at times for a lot of listeners. There are probably a lot of people I know, in fact, getting a little nervous right now, wondering, is he really going to go there? Or he wouldn't call that out, would he? If you're wondering, the answer is probably yes. With the exception of guests, though, and those to whom I owe a debt of gratitude or whose example all should know about, I don't plan to be naming names. Not many, anyway. In a lot of the episodes to come, I'll be giving thanks and recognizing some of the people who gave me a hand along the way. From the teacher who came and checked on me in that studio apartment to make sure I was doing okay on the wrong side of town, to some amazing leaders, mentors, and friends who have inspired and been there for me and the business partners I've had over the years. Today, though, I do have to give a few shout outs as I start to some people without whom this podcast would not be happening. First, and above all others, my wife, Carrie. She didn't just fight to keep me alive when Death and I spent a few days chatting about the end. She made me want to live and gave me reason. She is my rock, my light in the dark, and my constant ally and source of strength and encouragement. She supports me chasing every dream and what others warn me is impossible. Even on the craziest of my ideas, the impractical, the unreasonable, the occasionally unwise or unsafe, she's there. Sometimes with an eye roll, but always with a smile that says, I believe in you. I would also not be physically, emotionally, or mentally where I am without the friendship, support, and guidance of two men I'm proud to call friends and brothers. Nick and Josh have both faced their own challenges, battled their own internal fights, and put it all on the line serving their country. Neither of them rode off into the sunset and called their own journey of service complete when they would have had every right to do so. Instead, they turned around and reached their hands out to help others find their path. When I was at a low point, Nick helped me get my head back in the game and on a path to the life I want, the life my family deserves. And as my coach, my friend, and my brother on this path, Josh has been that iron fist in a velvet glove who knows when I need a challenge or a kick in the ass, and knows when I need to be pushed to find my own answers. Carrie, Nick, Josh, and all of my friends who have encouraged me on this path, thank you. I'll do my best to see to it you don't rethink that encouragement. So who is Berrick? Who is your host? At the top of this episode, I shared a little of my story, but that was largely the external side. What was happening on the outside more than the internal journey for me. In some ways, my story isn't that much different than a lot of folks. The youngest child of a couple who probably never should have been married, who were so angry and hurt enough by each other to go through an ugly divorce by the time I was 2. Each would get remarried in the coming years to people much better suited for them, but neither particularly suited for raising kids. My mother was in law enforcement, but loved the bottle more than her family or her job, and that played out exactly as you might think. Staring down the barrel of her new husband's service revolver at 14, I said goodbye, and I never looked back. My father, on the other hand, was the insatiable learner with the unwavering scientific mind of logic and data, whose path took him from being a nuclear physicist to corporate attorney and federal judge. His wife has that same intellectual mind and drive. Between the 4 parents, it would be my father and stepmother I'd maintain a relationship with. But for most of my life, really until recent years, there wasn't a place I'd say was home or any roots I felt anchored me anywhere. The last words from my biological mother when I was a teenager weren't to me. They were to the local school when I tried to enroll to finish high school, and she refused to sign the paperwork, telling them, Tell him just to give up. He should just enlist in the military and accept he's never going to be anything or any good. Those words left some scars. But at the time, it was just fuel on my fire. And my only response then was challenge accepted. Watch what I do, but no, you'll never be part of it. That is probably where the story of who I am today really began. I was a young man with a giant chip on his shoulder, full of anger, full of hurt, and absolutely determined to show them, whoever they are, that I was not only going to make it, I was going to defy all the odds and do what so many said I couldn't. And that's what I did. Mine became a story of stubbornness, at times ruthless pursuits, of heartbreaks, reckonings, of realizations, a life of survival, of never accepting defeat or being told what couldn't be done, of climbing every summit I was told was too high, of having to learn more than once that all of that wasn't worth much without broader meaning to life or people to share it with. In more recent years, mine has become a story of seeking redemption, of painful self-awareness of the past, of working every day to make up for or give back in ways that offset the pain I knew, the pain I at times had caused. It's a life that every day is spent committed to embracing the gift of every sunrise I get to see, each day I get, and every adventure, memory, and moment I have with my wife, kids, and friends. Thinking back, as a kid, I was that wide-eyed, heart-on-your-sleeve, full of ambition and eyes of wonder dreamer. I was the 12-year-old boy who picked flowers to give to the neighbor girl, who chased dolphins in the ocean and believed in dreams of the wildest and most magical kind. Then life started swinging. I went into survivor and fighter mode, which kept me pressing forward against odds at every turn. It thickened my skin. Took away that idealism, erased the innocence, and pushed anything from the previous me so deep inside it couldn't find its way to the surface to remind me who I'd once been. The longer I lived that way, the more detached from my past self I became. I was hardened, but in some way, I was liberated. I didn't have roots that held me or pulled me somewhere, or a family I stayed particularly close connected to. No hometown or a place I considered home that I'd miss. I didn't have any expectations of life other than I was going to go at it hard. I was going to crush it. If I lost, if I got knocked down, if it all ended, at least I went on the ride. And along the way, I was going to chalk up some wins, take in some experiences that a kid like me probably had no right to know. For me, every day I was getting was a bonus. And the future wasn't something I thought was in the cards for me. So the risk-reward calculation became seriously skewed because I simply didn't care about the risk or the potential consequences. That approach to life did limit the quality of relationships I let myself have. With very few exceptions, I didn't let myself get close to many people or let people get to know the true me. It also opened some unexpected doors and paths in life, though. Turns out a highly motivated, arguably cocky, or at least quite confident young man who was willing to jump at any opportunity without considering the potential risk or downside, and who was hell-bent on showing he could do what others weren't willing or didn't believe possible, was in fact a perfect fit for some things and pretty damn good at some tasks. So on that path enabled by that attitude and way of living, I was extremely effective at what I did because the outcomes were all that mattered. I relentlessly and ruthlessly pursued those outcomes. I had cut all bridges to my past, to anything that resembled roots. That combination made me a valuable asset to the government agencies I did work for. It made me highly effective in business pursuits. It made me sought after by business leaders and politicians alike. By a lot of outside measures, it made me successful. It also made a world-traveling life that was pretty damn empty of personal connections. There were few, if any, people I trusted, and even fewer with whom I was open. In the late 1990s, my business partner, who grew up in Oakland and had been the youngest trader ever on the floor of the Pacific Coast Options Exchange, was one of the few people I did trust. He and I had both fought and climbed our way into a place most would have said we had no right being. We were running a boutique corporate finance shop in San Francisco, helping launch and fund startups. We had holdings in a dozen companies, including some of the most disruptive and industry-changing leaders, companies that were revolutionizing how cars communicated, how people connected on the internet, the first company to offer digital music subscriptions. We did well for ourselves, even though we never made the huge paydays that we saw some of our peers knock down. But life was good. I traveled the world, split time between San Francisco and New York City, was on a plane to somewhere most weeks, and when I wasn't on the road, I was living large in a loft overlooking the San Francisco Bay Bridge. We were playing in the big leagues. For the kid from the wrong side of the tracks, I'd fought my way into a world nobody, including me, believed I could. I was having a ball. We were in the center of the action, and we were on top of the world. Then I remember the day the market crashed, like it was yesterday. Like a train wreck in slow motion you couldn't stop watching. Couldn't really believe was happening right before our eyes. And when it was done, we sat in a moment of disbelief. The NASDAQ composite had fallen more than 9% that day, bringing to a close a week that saw the index fall more than 25%, as losses and fears combined with looming tax bills from a decade of growth to send the markets into a steep correction that would wipe out billions in paper valuations, take out a lot of cash-strapped and unprofitable companies, ruin their futures. I can still smell the damp San Francisco air rolling across my roof deck that afternoon when the market closed. Staring out at the city and bay, opening a bottle with my business partner, looking around at everything and just saying, well, Bubba, neither of us was ever supposed to make it this far. If it all ends, it was a hell of a ride on this side of the tracks. Over the next week, we had a simple choice to make. Accept defeat and the end of an era, or lick our wounds, dust ourselves off, and find opportunity in the distress. That discussion was short. The answer, clear. Our firm was named after the mythical bird that is reborn and rises from the ashes, and the only answer was to do just that. So much of that year was spent acquiring distressed assets of companies we'd worked with, their competitors, and other undervalued assets that could be rolled up and given new life. Then we made a big shift, took a break from our client-facing work to operate a number of those companies we acquired, mostly in the digital media and entertainment world. That wasn't the end, but it was a moment that things changed. We'd swooped in to pick up pieces while a lot of others were still waiting for the smoke to clear. In a few weeks, businesses we had holdings in were now businesses we'd taken over and were rolling up with others. We were indeed making lemonade, but things were just different for me. I'd love to tell you that was the day I woke up and changed it all. I didn't. It wasn't. Not entirely. That day did start some big changes, and in ways I don't think I even fully understood. It was the start of the journey home. Home to myself, but also to a realization that sometimes home isn't what you imagined or remembered, and you're not who or what you once were. We'll get to that journey home and realizations all in some upcoming episodes. At that point, it took 20 years to even get to that point, and then another 15 along with the dance with death for the smack to my head to be big enough, the facts of my life to matter enough for me to be ready to change. Now, before you start thinking this is going to be just another story of defeating the odds or of making peace and finding redemption, and that will be part of it, but it is much more. It's the lessons learned along the way, from the scars of losses, of seeing people for who they really are, and the realization that sometimes even the victories you thought were the real prize don't bring satisfaction for long, if at all. This month is the anniversary of my second alive day. This week, a few years ago, I had just spent 72 hours talking with death. I had suddenly gone from 170 pounds to 120 pounds in less than 3 weeks. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. And the doctors were telling my girlfriend the next available appointment with a specialist who could treat me was weeks away. Death and I weren't negotiating. There were no ultimatums, no threats or dark tales, just 72 hours without sleep, me and death, acknowledging what was around the corner. I had faced death before, but the first time it came in a flash with no time to think until after the fact. This time was totally different. I was wasting away, and I knew it was coming. All my life until then, I'd approached every day as a bonus. I didn't think I should still be around, certainly not since my first dance with death 25 years prior. I'd always figured I was living on borrowed time, and frankly ready if my time came. But life was different this time. I'd started finding peace. I had found the woman I was meant to spend my life with. I recall so vividly turning to death that last night and saying, no, not now, not yet. There's too much she and I have left to go do still. It wasn't a negotiation. It was just a statement. And I'll never forget early that next morning when I turned to Carrie and told her, I don't have much time left. Without major medical intervention, I'm not going to make it. Carrie moved mountains to get me into the doctor, and when he didn't move with urgency, Carrie found another path. My life literally was saved by Carrie's raw determination and unwillingness to accept no. Hours after that conversation, when the nurse couldn't even get an IV started, she emergency admitted me, and a long journey began. Crohn's disease had destroyed my large intestine, leaving it unable to process food and me bleeding out internally. When the surgeon took my large intestine out, it disintegrated in his hands. And he said even another 24 hours and I would have gone septic and likely not made it. That was one of what would be 21 surgeries in 36 months. I'll talk more about that on future episodes. The physical, the emotional, and the financial toll, and all the curves and twists that would bring. But that didn't just start a medical journey and healing. It began a personal journey and path of healing on every front. I'm back, stronger than ever, physically, mentally, and emotionally. I'm in the game, but it's the game I'm choosing to play and win with my rules, my objectives, and my chosen teammates. I'm also still acutely aware of my faults, of my quirks, and the areas where I still have a lot of work to do. I said those days watching it all crumble around me in San Francisco weren't enough to be a true wake-up. Maybe it wasn't the events that weren't enough. It was me. It was my ability to listen, to reflect, or to change. I wasn't ready for that wake-up or to do the work it would take. But now, almost 20 years later, having found peace, having found love, and quite literally feeling it all, life itself coming to an end, I was finally at a place to listen to the world around me, to reflect on the path I'd forged and stumbled along, and to commit to learning from that and to growing as I was given yet another chance at life. At one particular crossroads in life, when I was still out there with a giant chip on my shoulder, taking on the world, and at that moment trying to decide my next move, a woman I loved with all my heart, who had known me through some dark times when we were young, gave me a quote from her scrapbook that said, "To give anything less than your best is to sacrifice the gift." That quote has sat on or in my desk ever since. Meg was killed by an IED outside Ramadi on December 6th of 2006. Through tears when I got that news, I clutched that quote and made a new promise to her then and again when I came out of surgery a few years ago, to honor her by honoring the gift. Today, I truly believe that we all have two lives. The second begins when we realize we only have one. From my personal experience, I can tell you without question that when that realization comes, it can change you and your life path if you let it. It can empower you, energize you, and open you up to a new view of life, of your purpose, and an understanding of your potential. For me, that realization has meant figuring out what and who really matters. It's meant cutting out the things or people who don't, and making time for those people and things that do. It's meant prioritizing the relationships with loved ones and friends. It's meant saying yes far more often, and when the opportunity to try, to explore, to learn or experience presents itself, to leap at those opportunities. It's also meant figuring out my purpose, what drives me, and what I'm meant to do. This podcast and my professional work today are all part of that. The biggest thing that realization has meant for me, though, is the absolute, non-negotiable, unwavering commitment to live my life with purpose, with intention, to do those things that fulfill me and that make the world around me better, to be intentional about where I choose to spend my time and energy, and to do those things with everything I've got. No half measures, no shortcuts, and no, that's good enough, or I'll get to that, or tell them that next time. That's how we get to the title of this podcast. An absolute commitment to living all in, and a deep desire to help others find that same path. So that's what we'll be talking about in the episodes to come. What does it look like to live all in? From the small stuff to the big, the daily tasks to the giant undertakings or opportunities. What does it take and how does it feel when you're fully committed to not wasting the gift? When you hold yourself to an incredibly high standard, not in the outcomes you achieve, but in the effort you put in. The character, integrity, and way of living you hold yourself to and hold others to as well. I'll be the first to admit that a lot of the lessons I learned and successes I had came about because I was too stubborn, too cocksure to know better, and too idealistic and determined to be really interested in knowing the odds, much less understanding the scope or seriousness of some of the challenges I took on. That worked out for me, probably more by dumb luck or chance. I'm grateful for that. But if I can help somebody else learn from my battles, or at least arm them a little bit better for their own, that's what I'm hoping for. So thank you, truly, for listening to this pilot episode. I know it's time out of your day that could be spent on any one of a dozen other topics or hundreds of other podcasts. I'm honored and I'm grateful you took the time to listen and hope you found something you can use or think about. I also hope you'll tune into the show going forward. I'm planning to drop new episodes at least every other week, and as ideas or events in the world or life call for, I'll drop bonus episodes and shorts in between regular shows. Before you sign off, please do subscribe or follow so you don't miss any upcoming episodes and you get alerts right when new episodes are released. If you're on social media, give the show a follow at Living All In on Instagram and Living All In Podcast on Facebook. You can also follow me directly at Berrick Abramson on Insta and on Facebook. I'd love your feedback, reviews, and help getting word out about the show. You can leave your review on the podcasting network where you're listening to this show right now, and I'd be truly appreciative of any help sharing links to the show on social media. You can drop me a message directly on any of the socials I mentioned, and I'd love your thoughts about the show, ideas for future shows, or for guests. Thank you for giving the show a listen. As you go about your day, I'd encourage you to do your own internal assessment. Is this something I want to prioritize or make time for? Is what I'm doing something I have to do? Is this one of those things I really should be doing all in? Am I? Until next time, live with purpose, live with intention, and live all in.